While other leaders were condemning Palestinian terrorists, Yara Sachs held their hands for selfies. She called Israel racist, then backed millions to UNRWA, Hamas's front. She stood by the liberals, ready to arrest Netanyahu. She is Trudeau's kind of Jew.
Good evening, Western Standard viewers, and welcome to Hannaford, a weekly politics show of the Western Standard. It is Thursday, April the 10th, and we are 19 days into a 35-day election campaign. Joining us now is David Knight Legg, a strategic advisor to the Alberta government, energy, and financial services firms, and he's no stranger to the Western Standard. Good to have you back, David.
Great to be back, Nigel.
You're calling in from Europe, I gather, David. Are they all in shock over there like we are?
They are. They're handling it a little differently than we are, but they're dealing with very similar themes. The Trump administration has changed the game, and they've done it in ways that no one predicted. It's normal for Trump to be unpredictable, if that makes any sense. But the really interesting dinner table conversations happening in Europe are exactly what it is that they are up to, because nobody believes that the Trump team is either misunderstanding these tactics or fumbling these tactics. And most people don't believe that they're doing them for purposes of self-dealing. So one of the real sort of debates happening between smart people that understand capital markets are pivoting around what exactly is the strategy here? Why is it being rolled out in this way? And why have they decided to go to all countries at the same time?
Okay. Well, let's come back on that. And let me just get a quick word from our sponsors in here. And that's where I'd like to pick the conversation up, is what the Europeans are making of the president's motivations. This episode of Hannaford is sponsored by New World Precious Metals, based right here in Calgary. Years of inflationary money printing and rising debt have decimated the savings of the average Canadian. Gold and silver are the only currencies that have held their value for thousands of years. Last year saw 30% gains. New World Precious Metals offers unique platforms to help protect and grow your hard-earned wealth with gold and silver. Check them out at newworldpm.com. David, that sounds like the sort of thing we should be thinking about. But come back to the Europeans. What are the two possibilities as they try to interpret the president's actions?
Well, look, I am going to check out newworldpm.com, and congratulations to your sponsor, because they have been in front of something that one of the companies whose board I sit on, managing assets for large family offices, was recommending 2 years ago, which is the importance of dealing with volatility by placing assets in secure categories like precious metals. The interesting thing for Canada is that we have extraordinary advantages right now in things like metals and mining, but we don't seem to have a clear plan over how Canada should be leveraging its position relative to the United States, given our unique advantages with the assets that we control as a country, but also our unique advantage in being the number one bilateral trading partner and the number one security partner with the United States. Europe is in a different position than Canada is, and I think that's probably the most important thing to understand in terms of drawing a distinction between how people react and respond. Everybody that is dealing with these tariffs has to react and respond in a way that is advisable given their own unique position. And every country has a very different position. Every country has unique competitive advantages. It has unique gaps or challenges. It has unique relationship to the United States in terms of debt, relationship to the United States in terms of trade and assets, and a relationship to the United States in terms of security. And I think what's unique about what's happening right now is that all of those things are being put on the table at the same time. And that is creating extraordinary complexity in how negotiations will take place. But at the heart of what's going on is this debate around China. And if you sort of take apart the three different things that the U.S. government is doing right now related to trade, related to their own debt, and related to security, China is at the center of all three of those things. And this is starting to look more and more like a very careful strategy built around confronting China. And we're seeing sort of the first inning of what is probably one of the biggest great power conflicts playing out over trade, nearshoring, onshoring, repurposing, reindustrialization themes that are going to, be part of the lexicon of everybody's language and the way these markets are going to trade over the next few years.
So this, why, if that is the case, I'm not saying I don't agree with you, but if that is the case, if this is about China, why did it start with Canada and Mexico?
I think that the strategy has had a few different iterations, and I don't think that somebody going into any sort of chess game knows exactly how responses will play out. My guess is that the United States knows that it has the strongest leverage with both Canada and Mexico, and is able to manage their relationship and their sort of negotiations with those countries with all of the advantages. So, Canada, the Liberal government is trying hard to run against Donald Trump right now. And so the language that's being used about the way that Canada will respond to tariffs is, bullish on Canada's ability to actually have a response that is not completely self-defeating. But Canada has virtually no firepower with respect to the United States or its markets, has almost no leverage with respect to trade, and has zero leverage, literally none, with respect to security or sovereignty when it comes to security. So for the United States, negotiating with Mexico and Canada is simple and it's straightforward. And anybody looking at the numbers outside of the Liberal Party of Canada's strategy team, which is trying hard to create a sort of a virtual reality around what Canada could do with respect to the United States, knows that Canada has no leverage in this situation. We have to do a deal. My advice is that we do a deal that is bilateral, that we reject doing a multilateral deal with Mexico for a third time. I think that was a huge mistake. I think the U.S. would be open to a bilateral deal. And unlike Mexico, we have the ability to open the security files alongside the trade files with the United States in securing what could be the most extraordinary North American decade of prosperity and growth if we do it right. But the question is, will we do it right? Do we have a vision for what Canada can do and be in the world that includes us actually participating without being a deadbeat when it comes to NATO? Are we actually going to join AUKUS, the submarine warfare unit that our closest allies, the United States, the UK, and Australia, are actively involved with, and that we haven't earned a seat at the table with yet? Are we going to solve for the deep avoidance we have of dealing with our own drug crisis and our complicity in the American drug crisis, not based on what our porous borders can actually interdict, but based on what is actually happening both with fentanyl and with terror interdictions coming through the Canadian northern border? I think there's so much for Canada to do. And I think the story is right now, every country is looking at what their options are with respect to the United States. Most countries are looking at conciliation and dropping trade barriers and doing deals. China and Canada uniquely are looking at retributive tariffs and passing them. The U.S. is largely ignoring ours and giving us the same break they're giving to everybody else because they're not worried about negotiations with Canada long term. What they're really concerned with and focused on is dealing with China and coming straight at China on trade, debt, and security.
Well, I'd like to come back to the China question in a moment, but right now we're in the middle of an election, as you know, and we have two people, Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney.
Yeah.
Do you get the impression that they see the situation the way you've just described it and are carefully avoiding comment?
Yes. They have to. It's not even, nothing I've said is remotely controversial. It's Canada has had a decade of the worst productivity out of the 40 advanced economies in the world. And we are on track to be the very worst until 2030. And when they ran the numbers, they said probably till 2060. There is zero chance that Canada can engage in a trade war with the United States and survive for months. It's just, there is nothing controversial about this. No serious economist can look at Canada's current position as an economy and say that we have the remotest chance of doing anything that threatens the United States when it comes to trade. We have zero leverage. We have had a decade of collapsing productivity. We have a GDP that cannot keep up with even supplying our own government with enough money to function because it is so poor. The debt levels are now eating about, probably it's over 54 billion now, probably up to, it was 62 billion the last time that Chrystia Freeland decided to resign the day before admitting that in Parliament. We are not in any position to fight. We're the 95-pound weakling that wants to go into a tariff war with Mike Tyson. It's not going to work. Nobody's betting on it. And it's so extreme that even very close friends of Mark Carney's, the CEO of Eurasia Group, where Mark Carney's wife works, where Jerry Butts works, came out and publicly said to American markets, there's no chance after this election that Canada does anything but fold, period. And he said that with the degree of authority that only somebody that knows Mark Carney, his wife, and Jerry Butts could possibly give. So there's no question that Canada is in a position where we have to figure out a plan for what we want to do in the world first, a vision for what we can be as a nation. And once we've figured those things out, and once we can convince Canadians that those things are worth playing for, then I think we can negotiate something with the United States that could lead to decades of extraordinary economic growth. But currently, the attempt to saber rattle isn't working for anybody that knows the numbers.
Now, you obviously have a good insight there into the Carney team. Do you have any sense of where the Conservatives are on this? Pierre Poilievre and the rest of the Conservative leaders.
Look, I think Pierre is fighting a good fight. It's hard for him to get quality time from our state-run media because they know that one of his goals will be to reduce the reliance of our media on taxpayer dollars, and they're aware of that. And I think that that's meant that they aren't entirely celebrating. It's extraordinary to me that somebody who's a politician can pull 15,000 people to an open rally and not have that be the top story of the election so far, because that is just an extraordinary outcome. It a former sitting prime minister, Stephen Harper, introduced him. Very compelling speech, and it hardly made a ripple in our state-run media. I think we have a problem as a country in that Canada is currently governed by a party that decided to turn us back to the 1970s and sort of a statist media approach that helps maintain the messaging that they want on things. Pierre's fighting uphill against that. He's fighting uphill against having been in landslide territory for months. And then with the passing of the torch from Justin Trudeau to Mark Carney, having somebody that is able to portray himself as a safe pair of hands, literate, financially literate, which is a nice change from Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau. But, he's also been able to escape taking any accountability for his advisory work for the last 5 years, which have been the worst 5 years for Canada, largely due to Mark Carney's ideology on climate alarmism and on deficit and debt spending that has left us in an extraordinarily bad position. So I think Mark Carney has a lot to answer for. I think that the Liberal Party's changing of the guard has worked for them. And I think their close messaging through the media has also worked for them. It's instructive to me to note that the number one demographic, the only demographic that Mark Carney substantially leads in is the demographic that tends to vote the most, which is everyone over the age of 60. That's everybody that still watches TV. It's everybody that's retired and has time to watch TV. And I think, the alignment between state-run media, people in that older demographic that still rely on those older channels for their information, and the ability of the Carney election campaign team to run a targeted sort of focused strategy around that demographic is instructive. It's telling. I'm disappointed that that demographic of boomers is so falling so easily for, the new version of what has been a bad hand for the country for a decade. But it's been tactically effective, and Pierre has to figure out a way to differentiate himself on that front.
Perhaps this is a good moment for me to remind Western Standard viewers that the Western Standard does not accept any subsidy of any kind from the program that David is talking about here, which puts, I think, something like $600 million into the so-called mainstream media. We don't take that money. It's you can't take a little bit of heroin. In the end, you have to take a lot. David, let's just switch gears. I mean, you've just been preaching our line there. We love to listen to you talk about the iniquities of the mainstream media, but the fact of the matter is we kind of got used to it now and do the best we can here. And what is President Trump trying to do with China? Is he trying to completely shut them out of the American market? Does he have a more sinister plan? I can't imagine what it would be, but what do you say?
Well, look, I think that when you have, great power rivalry, which is always the case in global affairs, you have to look at the fact that the chessboard has multiple different pieces on it and multiple different vectors. And, maybe I'll answer that question by referring to categories that we understand in Canada. When the Trump administration first said we are going to put tariffs on Canada because of the following things were things that people found, almost unbelievable, which was, your problem with fentanyl. You're part of the fentanyl trade. And so, we sort of said, okay, well, we'll put $1.3 billion into border security and we'll help deal with fentanyl. But nobody really believed it was entirely about fentanyl, because it was, we have an important kind of open border. And so there's security issues that we need to address. But we knew that wasn't entirely the case. We also knew that, the trade relationship between Canada and the United States is net beneficial to the United States. They have a trade surplus with us of $58 billion until you include oil and gas. Once you include oil and gas, they go into deficit, but that is not a real deficit, because the bilateral trade in energy is one way from Canada to the United States at exceptional value to them. They refine and repurpose that, and then they make money when they export. They consume a lot at a exceptional value below global markets, and then they refine and export a lot, and they make huge profits on it. So we knew that discussion with the Trump administration wasn't going anywhere. And what was interesting to me, two things were interesting. One was, our media didn't really dig into the dynamics of the security relationship between Canada and the United States, which I think has 4 or 5 different